Welcome, everybody, to Talking Fates, the Star Wars podcast where we discuss another Star Wars podcast, specifically Duel of the Fates, a podcast in 9 parts based on the alleged Derek Connolly, Colin Trevorrow draft of the Star Wars Episode 9 script. I'm John Murray, co-host of Star Wars TV Talk, along with my TV Talk cohort, Zack Logan, and we are joined this week by Duel of the Fates mortal enemies / star-crossed lovers, Shelby Handley and Dan Barra-Berger, who play Rey Solana and Kylo Ben, respectively, in this final chapter of the limited run 9-installment podcast. All right, Zack, for one last time, take it away.
Well, I am just super excited to discuss this episode because, wow, what a crazy conclusion to this story we got. And then I would also like to thank Dan and Shelby for joining us. So, Dan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be here right at the end, and happy to share the mic with Shelby.
Mm-hmm.
And Shelby, how are you doing?
I'm good. Likewise, happy to be back. It was really fun last time, so looking forward to diving into it this week.
Yeah, the nice thing about having both of you guys on the cast together is, well, now that we can be kind of, not spoiler averse and talk about the project as a whole, obviously everything culminates with you two facing off on Mortis. So, who better to have on the cast to speak to kind of that thrilling climax and sort of the emotions and what underpin both of your performances during this, final reel of Duel of the Fates. So I think it's appropriate that we have you in. I'm really excited to really kind of dig deep on the radio play as a whole this week.
There is so much to get through. There's so much awesome stuff that happened in this 9-part audio drama as a whole, but especially in this last 25 minutes that we got in this final episode of Duel of the Fates, the 9-part installment podcast. So let's just get right into it. So last episode, it ended with a pretty brutal fight between Kylo and Rey, in which Rey was blinded by Kylo. Now that I'm like seeing some visuals in my head, I'm trying to process how this would look on screen, and holy cow, it took a very dark turn. So Dan, I want to ask you something. What did you think of this scene, and how do you feel about this kind of ruthless version of Kylo who like walks away and says goodbye, scavenger?
It was in a weird kind of morbid way. It was kind of funny for me because I am legally blind myself, and I walk with a white cane and everything. I'm like, well, that would have been way cooler way to have that happen to me than getting kicked in the head on a playground when I was 7. So this is like, I was like, I'm gonna just take that as my story from here out. But no, I kind of it really to me felt just extra vicious. Like we knew that it makes Kylo feel just irredeemable there.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I liked the, pardon the blind pun, but the imagery of it, because so much of Star Wars is drawn on old like Japanese cinema and everything, and so this throws back in a way to like Zatoichi, the blind samurai, and and a lot of those early like blind samurai tropes. And then when Rey comes back and kicks ass, then you did a great service to all us blind Jedi everywhere. So yeah.
And then Shelby, how did you take in all this? What did you think of it all?
Yeah, it is, and we kind of talked about this a bit last time, but it is so much more violent than the movie that we got. And I feel like this ending, the way it comes together, was a little bit more appropriate. Or it felt more right, I guess I should say, to me at least.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very, reading the script, it was hard sitting there and just being like, okay, I just got lightsaber to the eye. So, okay, awesome. And going from there, and then trying to channel all of that pain and anger and everything that she's feeling and sort of push that back outward for those final few scenes.
And so this embracing of that anger and love where she becomes, in essence, a gray Jedi. Now, how did you respond? Can you kind of dig deeper into your thoughts on Rey embracing both the dark and the light?
Yeah, I mean, she really is going through a struggle the entire series, and we see it a lot. We see it, I think, a little bit more vocally in this script that we have here. Just the constant reminder of her saying, balance, like what is balance? What we've been taught to believe is balance. I just don't agree with that. And so I do think that this idea that balance is not having the light and having the dark, but rather having them both and figuring out what that looks like and how to navigate that. And even in those final scenes with everyone in sort of the Force thereafter,
the
if
astral
you will.
plane, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Just to hear everyone sort of confirming like, yes, that is right. That is what we were missing. I think really channeling that for her. She does have so much anger throughout the whole thing, but she's trying so hard to stay on the path of light. And this is an acceptance that I can be angry. I can feel all of these things, and it doesn't make me bad. It doesn't make me evil. It doesn't make me of the dark. It just makes me of both. And that is actually what makes me a Jedi. So sort of coming to terms with those, and just like it's fun a little bit more from an acting standpoint to explore both, because you don't have to be as controlled in those moments, and you can really play with letting that anger seep out and not trying to push it away.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved this whole thing. It was very reminiscent of, Dan's already pointed out, this kind of blind samurai trope. But I also was getting like some Matrix vibes here,
Yes.
and just so much of these like kind of callbacks to these classic films. And of course, when you know who is allegedly writing this, it all makes sense. Like this all feels like Trevorrow. But Dan,
Yes.
you also pointed out that Kylo gets his ass kicked. And so let's move on to that whole thing where Rey becomes what the Jedi are meant to be, and Kylo loses some fingers, and it's really kind of this brutal thing. Once again, going super dark. I think this would have been the darkest that Star Wars has ever gone, minus
Absolutely.
Anakin killing some younglings off screen. But once again, what was it like playing with that, and then also him just ruthlessly saying, Rey, you know what, you got some life there, it'd be a shame someone took it from you?
I think when I listened to the whole thing through, I was like a lot of people, I was kind of listening along as the parts were released. And so what I come away from this full script is that, yeah, like what they built with Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, well, Rey was the last Jedi, being like she by embracing the light and the dark, she kind of kills off all the dogma of the idea of the balance. So you have your light, and you have to be, as a Jedi, you have to be light, and or you're Sith, you have to be dark. And I think and then Rey realizes, oh no, ¿por qué no los dos? I can be both. And then I felt like Kylo was really holding on to that. No, there has to be two sides there. And that kind of represents to me all the previous films. And I think this would have been a much better interpretation of the whole, the prophecy as all the films went. And kind of wish we got it now.
Yeah, it definitely has more of a satisfying bookend for some of the major themes that have run throughout the entire saga. And it does feel like Rise of Skywalker, because it was going in so many directions, didn't really have a chance to drive any of those home. It just kind of got lost in all of its meandering, and didn't really make the point that this script made. And to think that this was just seemingly an early draft, if not the first draft of what could have been, it seems like they were definitely going down the right direction as far as really figuring out something new to say about the nature of the Force, and what we learned in the prequel trilogy, which is, the Jedi didn't have it all figured out. There was obviously some flaws, and they made that clear in The Last Jedi as well, that even Luke recognized that, oh no, this wasn't the only way to approach things. And it was actually pretty misguided. So it's neat that they picked the ball up and ran with all of that. And so it feels like much more of a fitting finale to actually take all of what's been established and say something fresh about it. And I agree with you absolutely, Dan. That's at this point now, having listened to all 9 parts, it's very bittersweet that there was so much more that could have been said in episode 9. And it's only gonna ever live on in this wonderful little makeshift podcast that
I'm proud to be
put
part
together.
of it.
Well,
Absolutely.
one of the things that I realized while listening to this was, if you did not watch any of the extra Star Wars material, so if you didn't watch Clone Wars, Rebels, if you didn't read any of the books, we have no idea how the Force works. Like it feels like almost nothing was answered, and purposely so in a lot of instances where it's just like it's a mystery. Qui-Gon Jinn, I think, explains it the best in episode 1, but we really don't understand what actually happens with the Force until you get this version. And I think it dives deeper into that mythos of the Force than any Star Wars has done, because we're about to get a big thing that drops in this episode regarding Rey, her lineage, and then also this kind of afterlife that she goes to. So I want to ask both of you, Shelby first, what did you think of this reveal of Rey's lineage?
Well, as we established last time, as what you called me out for, since I am not one of the most well-versed Star Wars fans out there, I was very sort of curious as well how understanding Rey would be like of that name herself. Like obviously it carries some weight to her, and it seems to when you read the script and having her hear it aloud, and she thinks she kind of knew that somewhere deep down already. But it is interesting, you know, she was living in this very secluded life away from everything. How much she would really understand what that meant, or if she really understood it at least before. I'm sure in her trainings and stuff that would have become more apparent to her. But it was interesting to me how different that was again from the film, because that went a very, very different
could not have gone in
way.
any more of a different direction.
So I think it felt a little bit, I think, and I'll say it again, it felt a little bit more right. It felt a little bit, I could come to terms with this a little bit more, I think, than when I watched the film.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Dan, we have Kylo Ren, the jerk face, who knew this since The Last Jedi, who's been keeping this from Rey for some time now. And then you, of course, have Ben Solo, who reveals this to Rey. Now, this whole scene, he, of course, gives the life force plus his own back to Rey, ultimately healing her, and reveals this lineage. So what was that like for you, and how did you respond to it?
I think it was a much better redemption than we received in the film, to be honest, because it isn't the there was a bit of back and forth, but not the overt like, and now she's down, and now she's up, and now he's down, and now he's up, and then they kiss. Like it was like watching a drinking bird, you know. And but with this, it felt more natural. It felt like he wasn't looking for any kind of cosmic forgiveness. He just, it was his version of a selfless act, and kind of like, I know I done screwed up, so let me, like, here's your name, and I'm gone. Like, and I kind of liked that it was a little, I felt like it was kind of understated for him going. There wasn't any pomp or fanfare or anything. It was to save one person rather than a whole galaxy or a big space battle above. It was just one person, and I think that showed the character of Ben more than anything.
Wow. And John, how did you feel about this reveal here?
I think, I guess I just have to echo what's already been said. I don't want to just restate it, but it feels very fitting. It feels like it was a more organic conclusion to them squaring off and them being kind of in the midst of the wellspring of the Force, and just being like where they're at and what the stakes are and who these characters are and what their past is that we now understand. It seemed like, you know, unless someone's just going to lop your head off with a lightsaber, this is kind of the only other way it could go. You know, like a moment of truth laid bare and a moment of agency for Kylo Ren. Like that's kind of the one thing that Kylo Ren's never really had. In Force Awakens, he's under Snoke's thumb. Mm-hmm. And by the end of Force Awakens, he's so torn up and conflicted because of what he did to his father that throughout Last Jedi, he's just on a rampage, really. And because he's so just like pulled by his passions and just so rend asunder, like emotionally, he hasn't really had the opportunity to just do what he wants, like what truly deep down he should be driven to do in a moment where there's no other stakes and there's nothing else to win or lose, just who is he and what's he going to choose to do of his own volition. It was nice to have a little moment of that where he tries to give a little bit of closure and, just
Mhm.
something good at the end of all this. So I don't know. There's a lot of analysis you can put on it,
Right.
but it just felt very good, I guess, is where I got to leave it.
I mean, I have been one to defend the Rey Palpatine from the beginning. I like that version of the story. I still do. But this one feels like it's still fitting. Like there is a world in which two endings fit. We obviously got the end result, but if we never had that, it would have been in the back of our minds that we wouldn't have even known what would have happened. This is a little bit different because a full first draft of the script was completed and we see it. But I feel like it was a very interesting take. It also shows that it kind of flips the script where Kylo was lying to Rey and the Last Jedi about her parents. When in the version we got, that's not the case. He saw what we kind of all saw. So I enjoyed both. And in this one though, it's really interesting, and I want to point out because people have already complained about it. Her last name probably wouldn't have stayed Solana.
Yeah, that's definitely filler. Yeah.
That is definitely just, okay, let's put this name here and then we'll get the kinks out later as we get further down. So it wouldn't have been that close to Solo.
It's half Solo, half Organa, right?
Right.
Like that's,
Yes.
they're just like riffing and just putting it down as they go. I'm sure that would have evolved. Yeah.
So yes. And a lot of people are pro liking Rey be this no one to the galaxy because, like she says, no one is no one. And so I thought that it was still a super beautiful ending. But then something else crazy happens. We get to see where the Jedi go when they depart from the physical world. So this afterlife scene, I kind of want everyone's opinion on it. So let's start with Shelby. What did you think of Rey going into this afterlife, the whatever you want to call it, this platform 9 3/4 thing?
Yeah, the astral plane, if you will, correcting myself from earlier. Yeah, what an interesting scene. It felt in some ways a little bit more coming together to really just wrap everything up. It did feel in some ways a little bit, we're going to bring everyone together so we have this final closure. But it sort of was nice, I think, like for Rey as a character, especially having everything that she has fought for and struggled for be affirmed. And so easily by all her teachers who were pushing her in a different way or to see things differently. And she refused to accept that, to go, oh, look at that. Yes, you were right all along. But I think it does allow more space going forward to have her go and choose to come back. I really think that choice to, even though she has been kind of this no one, I think in a lot of ways, deciding to go back is her saying, again, without words, no one is no one. Like, I am choosing to put myself now in a position where I can, the implication in the script is that she will teach the next generation of Jedi going forward, and she will really be a someone, and she can be whoever it is that she wants to be going forward, and not just this Jedi who has controlled the Force and defeated Kylo Ren, more than the legend. I think so. Rather than stay just the legend, she's sort of taking the opposite route of Luke in some ways and going back to really sort of solidify the things that she has fought for, and also just immerse herself in the life that she never had.
And Dan, what about you? Same question.
I think it being, so this was like the first draft of the script. That's we're pretty confirmed on that, because it did feel very much like I liked where they were going with it, but it did feel like the Harry Dumbledore on the it's like, oh, you're dead, you're not, but maybe, yeah, not, and then it's Luke, and oh, hey, I brought my two friends, they really wanted to meet you, and so like, why it's Obi-Wan and Yoda, it's like, sure, they're the iconic ones, but there could be that, I think, is where they would have had the if this had been produced, that's where all the the one scene in Rise of Skywalker where all the whispering is, it's like, we're with you, right? That's just the one Obi-Wan with the one clip that they don't, right, like, made no sense, but they, I think that's where they would have done that and kind of been like, hey, cameo fiesta, and it might not have been like the bright white kind of stereotype of death, but I like what they were doing with the imagery and the scene itself. I imagine it would have changed up, but not tonally, if that makes any sense.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That's kind of my take on it. This feels, well, Star Wars from day one, the Force was basically Buddhism light. Like it's just like, generic spirituality. Lucas was pulling in stuff mainly from Buddhism. So it makes sense if Colin Trevorrow has done his homework and he's like, these are the themes. This is where all of this sprang from. How can I make sure that I pay homage to that a little bit in the script? And also, pay off, what we've set up with people disappearing and being able to come back as blue force ghosts or whatever. Like, how can we, work that in? And it just seems like they carved out this spot and they said, we know thematically this is going to work, but there's probably a little bit of room to massage this and make sure that, this, this gels a little bit better. But the idea, I think, of, giving Rey the opportunity, almost the fork in the road of, are you going to go back and continue to fight the fine fight? Or are you going to just, fade off into the ether? There's something poetic about that in the final chapter. So
Yeah.
I think they were on the right track. And I think, in subsequent drafts, this would have been fine tuned a little bit and probably, would have been really appropriate in whatever would have made it to screen.
Yeah.
It felt like they were kind of building towards something like that with like Rogue One, with the Guardians of the Wills.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Force stuff happening in all the expanded universe or whatever they're calling it now, like the bonus canon stuff. And then it just seemed like JJ's like, but lens flares,
right?
Yeah,
no, there was a lot of stuff that just didn't make the cut. So this I think if they'd continued to pull on that thread and just seen how this could have taken shape, I think thematically this makes sense in the final reel of episode 9 for them to have some sort of not just conclusion to the battle and the state of the galaxy and the Star Wars of it all, but also the spirituality, where do we leave the Force at this point? And this is basically the best setting to really drive home the idea that they've achieved balance by acknowledging, human nature includes both light and dark. And if you're always opposing it, you'll never be in balance. So there's a whole lot of yin and yang again, that fortune cookie, Buddhism kind of stuff.
Light, yeah.
But I think they really could have, made all that sing if they'd kept going down this path.
Yeah, John, what you said, I think is key, where there needed to be a moment where Yoda, especially because Yoda failed, and in The Last Jedi, he says the greatest teacher failure is,
Right.
There needed to be a moment where the Jedi acknowledged, like, you know what? Qui-Gon was right. In the end, like, he had it right. And we're in this whole mess because we didn't listen to that dude in the first place. So I think there needed to be that moment. And I think that that was kind of one of the big misses. I did struggle with it because I was just like, oh, platform 9 3/4. Like, this would not have worked in this version. Like, they would have had to write it a couple of different ways for me not to laugh seeing it on screen, because it would have been too close. And I understand, like, she didn't create that. I mean, that wasn't something that that JK actually created on her own. That's a very common trope where you go to the afterlife, you talk to people in the afterlife, and then you come back. But as far as screen time and just being so close to that film would have been a distraction. Now, a nice little trivia thing, and I don't know why JJ kept using it after The Force Awakens, because like Dan pointed out, it's like the Rey thing where it seems like he's asking a question. Rey. Well, that's actually a clip from Alec Guinness where he's telling Luke, don't be afraid. And they clipped afraid and kept the Rey portion in it to make it fit. So that was
that's
nerdy.
Yeah, no, if you put all the effort into preparing that little sound clip, you got to get your money's worth. So,
all right. So to end this episode, I want to discuss how this all ended. So how episode 9, the Duel of the Fates, ended in this version. So a brief opinion from everyone, starting with Shelby. What did you think of this ending of the saga?
When I first read the ending to this script, I went, okay, I think that's what I was going for when I watched the movie, and I didn't get that from the movie. And I think even just the back and forth between Kylo and Rey is more what I want. They've been I get like the intensity and the romance of the film, sure, but like they have been at entirely opposite ends fighting for different things. Rey is fighting for balance of light and dark, and Kylo is fighting for control of both of those things and life itself. So I think the conclusion to this felt very, I could hear the music as I was reading it, overlaying at the very end, sort of allowing space for whatever might come next, whether actually, more scripts or fan pieces or just, the imagination of the viewers. But it did feel a little bit more resolved, I think, for me. I liked it. That's what I'm going with. I liked this ending.
And then Dan, how about you?
I have to echo that. It's I think it was satisfying. I think, especially compared to, and I should say I did enjoy for the most part Rise of Skywalker, but I kind of enjoyed this ending more because you have your finality with Rey and Ben, and then you have the kind of like the return to the Shire sort of imagery where it did feel kind of like the field scene in Attack of the Clones, but nobody's rolling around with like big pill bugs. But but I thought it was nice. You see, it was kind of like the palate cleanser right at the end. Like that's the hope that we get to see, and it's calm and at peace. But in Rise of Skywalker, we saw Rey going to like buy an old house and taking the name for tax reasons, and Star Destroyers just falling out of the sky because traditionally that's what they do, apparently. But I think so. This version's was a lot more with a little more polishing. The final draft could have been pretty amazing and a little more poignant than what we did get.
Yeah. And then John,
as I was listening to this final chapter, I was thinking back to I had read a very early draft of Return of the Jedi a long time ago, and I remember how sprawling that script was and how much stuff was woven in that didn't make it into the final film, and how just unformed a lot of the themes are that seem so crystal clear in the final movie. They were still very ambiguous or just still very much in flux in the early script, and it makes you appreciate how this early on in the process, the goal is get everything you can into the script. And then we start carving back and fine tuning and whittling it down into something a little bit more manageable. So when I'm listening to this, I kind of feel like I need to, apply that same understanding to what we're hearing here, because there's there's like a few denouements to this. Like you have like a big climax, then you have like another big climax, and then you have, like what comes after, and then like a final decision, and then there's closure, and then there's peace, and then there's a little bit more closure. And you kind of, it's kind of like a slow ramp down, kind of like the end of Return of the King, but a bit, even a bit more meandering here. And I think that that's just them saying, look, how do you end a story like this? Well, you could have this, and you could have that, and you could have this, and these are all the things that in a perfect world we'd love to find a really elegant way to say them all. But let's at least just like get them on the page so that we don't forget about any of this stuff. So I think we're seeing a lot of things that would have really been slimmed down and streamlined into probably a lot fewer, poignant little moments to cap things off. I personally think that maybe the best way to go would have been to leave it ambiguous as to whether Rey comes back from the ethereal plane or whatever. Like, I think that if they just cut there, Yoda poses the question, here's the road in front of you, and you don't really see which way she goes. And then you get that little bit of banter, like, can we feel Rey? Can't we feel Rey? Oh, I believe she'll be back someday. And it's kind of like, we want to believe she's out there, and maybe if the galaxy comes calling, we'll get that answer in an episode 10 or something down the road, or, some other spinoff. I feel like if this had made it to screen, I have a feeling a lot of this would have been curbed in, and maybe they would have given us a little bit more to hang on. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here, but I think we're seeing very much as we move through this script, the closer you get to the end, the more sprawling everything is, because they haven't really tamed that beast yet. So I love it. I think that there's a lot here to like. I just really would have liked to see what would have come next.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and John, it's already been pointed out, this kind of Return of the King thing.
Mhm.
Quite literally, we do return to the Shire in the form of the planet Modesta. Is that right?
Yes. The planet Modesta, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Now, I don't like Shelby, you say you're not hardcore, so that may have gone over your head. Dan, I'm going to give you first crack at this. Do you understand what this Easter egg is?
Modesta. It's no. It's
No? Okay.
I feel like I'm gonna kick myself. It's
Okay, so that's okay. You're off the hook. This is kind of this is a deep cut. But Zach, now I'm not sure if you actually lived specifically
Yep, I did.
there. Okay, so right, like
are we
smack
talking
dab.
about a city in a state?
I think we're talking about Modesto,
Okay,
California,
that's where
which is where
go.
which is where Lucas hails from, which I think is in Marin County, right, Zach?
No, it's in Stanislaus County, so it's actually a couple hours away from Marin. But whenever I was reading this and the description of kind of this grassy field that they were in, even though there's not a whole lot of places in Stanislaus that's like super pretty grassy anymore, because a lot of it's just farm town now. But I was imagining Modesto, and maybe that was just because that's where I grew up. My dad still lives there. But it was totally this whole kind of striking a tear in my eye, because that, of course, is where Lucas grew up. All of his stuff was inspired from there. Modesto. American Graffiti was filmed there. And so I think that, with the combination of R2 premiering the Star Wars, would have gotten such an emotional response from me on screen, because it is so... It's so honoring to Lucas. And I know that he gets a lot of crap for the prequels, and people still can't agree whether or not they're good or they're bad. But it is so honoring to him, because it's like Modesta, that would have been something that he would have watched and he would have seen. And I would think had the same feelings that I had, even more, because Star Wars is his baby. And then American Graffiti, of course. Like, you don't live in Modesto and not visit those places, to the point where Lucas honored the city of Modesto by premiering Revenge of the Sith in Modesto, as like, this is where I'm having it last. That was something that my dad like pulled all the strings that he could, got me into that premiere, and I got to sit right behind Mark Hamill in Modesto at Brendan Theaters and watch this film 3 weeks before it came out to the general public. And so that, I think, all that combined, I would have lost it. I would have sat there and I would have cried, and everyone would have looked at me thinking, like, what the hell is wrong with you?
See, now that's really it. Both of these things, the R2D2 getting his memory bank put back in and then projecting the whole saga, and then the idea that they're going to pay homage to Lucas by naming that planet Modesta. Both of those things just say Colin Trevorrow obviously has a reverence for the source material and for what Lucas created. He's not coming at this from a place of like cynicism or like just seeing this as a typical franchise that you just churn out another movie of. And I feel like that's something that's worth underscoring. And so I think you hit it there, Zach, that the fact that he would pull in the R2D2 thing, because what that is, that's a running joke. Lucas has joked for a long time that basically the entire saga is being told from the droid's perspective, and that the reason why they're in every film is because ultimately R2D2 is like the master chronicler of the entire saga. So Colin Trevorrow obviously watched those documentaries and interviews and all the little things that would give you some insight into Lucas's thinking and just, the lore of Star Wars and the meta of Star Wars. And obviously he's pulling on that, and he's doing it in a really sentimental and kind way, because Lucas obviously had his misgivings about where the franchise went after he sold it. And what a nice thing that would have been for Lucas to show up at the premiere and maybe see that for the first time. And again, this is just a whole lot of what could have been, but I think that would have been very sweet.
Yeah. And it would have been our version of the song San Francisco, because whenever kind of growing up in this area, like that song, whenever you hear it, if you're going to San Francisco, all the lovely people there, all that stuff is really emotional to people that love San Francisco. And so I think this would have kind of been that version where people from Modesto that have loved Star Wars, because let's be honest, the best thing to happen to Modesto is George Lucas. Like, there's not much there. It's not necessarily a place that people are just like proud to jump up and say I'm from Modesto, but when you go to Star Wars trivia nights like I do, and that question pops up, and you pop up and you're like, it's Modesto. Yeah, we're all from here, and then we claim it. And so I think that would have just been extremely beautiful. So
now, Zach, do you think we should let our guests weigh in at some point here?
Absolutely.
we're nerding out here pretty hardcore. So
no, I'm loving it. Like, actually, if I can jump in real quick, I think for reading the script back, and as you guys mentioned, that I feel like Trevorrow looked at not just the source material of Lucas, but Lucas's source material, like being like R2 and 3PO being the two characters that go through so many of Akira Kurosawa's samurai movies, who just happen on. They're like the bumbling idiots who happen to, and one's tall and one's short and fat, and like they happen to go through everything, and like they're the chroniclers. And I think that was really well conveyed in this one, much over than what we got in any of the sequel films. So I think just that callback there was tremendous. So
yeah,
and
agreed.
like Luke said in Last Jedi, when R2 pulls out the little video of Leia, he's like, "That's not fair." I think the whole audience would be, "That's not fair."
Yeah, no, that's an emotional trump card. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Shelby, I have a task for you.
Great.
I want you to summarize your thoughts, your feelings in kind of a final statement on Duel of the Fates and what it was like working on it, and then cap that off with where people can find you.
Oh boy. Okay.
Super
heavy
easy.
task that is. Yeah. Okay. I would say overall, with this script and my experience working on this and bringing this to life, like what a unique opportunity. Not just like, I think for everyone to be able to see the script and have that, but then also to put it together in this way, I think has been something really special. And to then get to experience in sort of, you're talking about all the nostalgia. So I think that, unique and special are my statement words here, but it really was just a different experience that I'm so thrilled to have been a part of. And I've learned so much from you guys. And in terms of me, I have a few things on the go, or will be on the go soon, hopefully. So at beyondmentalborders.com, we will hopefully, that's our mentalist show. I know Armand was talking about that on his episode as well. We will hopefully be back on stage in the coming month or so. So for updates on that, that's where you can go, or at Beyond Mental Borders on Instagram. And then Armand and I as well also have a musical project in the works, on the go, just sort of getting started and out the gate, which is As We Are. So you can check us out there at asweare.music on Instagram. That would probably be the best way.
Very good.
All right, Dan, you have the same task to tell us how you felt about working on this project, and then where people can find you.
Oh, geez. Well, honestly, it was like, I love Star Wars. I've loved it since I was just a young buck. I've got a model of the Millennium Falcon sitting on my right next to me here, and it's just it was so flattering to even be part of it. I think I mentioned the last time I was on the podcast that when I talked to Jamie about doing a role, I thought it was going to be like at best a gonk droid or something, and he's like, "Yeah, no, you should be like Kylo." I'm like, "What? You what?" But he, I had so much fun. It was a whole learning experience for me. It's actually my first voice acting gig proper, I suppose, because normally outside of this, I'm a stand-up comic, so I'm used to like talking my own crap, not reading, which with low vision is not my strong suit, and also I'm incredibly lazy. But it was,
you hid those things well.
Thank you. Well, the source material and the people I got to work with, and yourself included, definitely gave me the stick-to-itiveness to want to do it. And no, I loved it, and I do wish I still enjoy Rise of Skywalker, but I do wish that we got an opportunity to see this on screen, or at least some kind of weird hybrid amalgamation of this and what we got. And Yeah, and as far as where you can find me, I live in Toronto, and our comedy venues are still closed. So there are some shows set up in parks. So if you're taking your dog out for a park run, you might see me. And beyond that, you can find me on Twitter at Dan Barra-Berger. I do talks about being a low vision traveler and living in the modern age with a disability at danbarraberger.com. And I actually do a YouTube channel with Aidan Bakrasi, who played Chancellor Hux. We have game. It's called Game and Scotch, and we are breaking totally new ground as a couple white guys talking about video games and drinking on the internet. It's never been done before, and it's just basically an excuse for us to have a couple beer and play video games, and why not? So, but that's where you can find me. But I love doing this too, and meeting all of you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Shelby and Dan, you did such a beautiful job working on this project. I hope that our acting paths can cross in the future, because I would love to work with you guys. It would be so much fun to
Likewise.
be able to
Love
do
that.
something like that. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
It was great having you back, and wow, what a wonderful job you guys did.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Agreed.
you.
Here.
I also want to thank our listeners for joining us on this journey, and remind them that there will be a full unabridged version of Duel of the Fates dropping soon, which will have all 9 parts in one episode. You can find more content from the creators of this audio drama at dewvre.com. That's DEWVRE.com. And of course, you can find myself and John over at StarWarsTVTalk.com, or by searching for Star Wars TV Talk wherever you get your podcasts.